Okay, third time doing the intro. Y'all don't know that though, so I don't know why I said that. Welcome back to CUS 6. It has been 4 weeks since I last uploaded. I apologize for that. I've just been really lazy and haven't had a lot of ideas. But, excuse me, had a burp. There's been an idea that has come to my head, and I wanted to really put it into words. And that is, drumroll please, homosexuality in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. This has really been a big idea, or like a question that's been in the back of my mind for a really long time. And I really wanted to make this video because I find it interesting how people who are like homophobic, like I idolize ancient Rome and ancient Greece despite how popular homosexuality was back then, albeit it's not talked about a lot. And I kind of want to shine some light on that with basic service level information presented in a way that makes me seem smart. And I just want to talk about certain things. Like at the end of the video, I probably want to talk about some things that I didn't feel was interesting enough to make like a full small paragraph on, but it caught my attention and I still want to talk about it. So without further ado, let's get into the video and get the beginner stuff out of the way. A lot of you may know that the Spartans were sent to train at war at around the age of like 6, 7. No, I'm just kidding. They were sent to train for war at around 7 or 8. And with how ancient Greece was at the time, women weren't allowed to fight in the war. So they were surrounded by men at age 7 and didn't usually leave the battlefield until around age 60. Of course, spending the years you go through puberty and by extension start feeling sexual attraction surrounded by nothing but men, it was only natural for them to develop feelings for the men around them and want to have, coitus with them. However, one could make the argument that because they weren't specifically located in Greece while in certain camps, they decided to do what they did. But looking at people that were in Greece at the time, relationships between two men were frowned upon for the most part. Many famous Greek philosophers, most noteworthy being Plato, often explored aspects of homosexuality and if it was wrong or right during the time. Even among the more elite in the social circles, a form of relationships between two men called pederasty, a relationship that involved an older man and a boy, usually in his teens, was not a rare sight. Now you may be asking yourself, what is a pederasty and what does that even mean? In ancient Greece, as I said, it's a relationship in ancient Greece between an older man and a young boy in his teens. In the pederasty relationship, the older man in the relationship, I say that word a lot, he took care of the young boy, providing not only education and protection, but also love and was a role model for the younger boy in the relationship. However, it's noted that penetrative sex was still demeaning, at least for the male receiving it. So, in pederasty, whenever the Erastes, the older man in the relationship, asked for sexual favors from his eromenos, the young boy in the relationship, it often came in the form of intercrural sex, or as it's colloquially known as, a thigh job. However, it's again important to note that not all pederasty relationships were sexual, although it's also not noted what percentage of pederasty relationships were non-sexual. Moving on to a different country, ancient Rome is our next talking point, and fair warning, I will mispronounce all of these names like I do commonly. Speaking of common, one thing that Rome had in common with ancient Greece is the fact that you were allowed to have sexual relations with another man, as long as you aren't the one receiving it. Although, the key difference that I do want to note is that the only acceptable male partners were slave men and former slave men who lost their social and or legal standing. It was also seen as normal and acceptable for men to have relations with both female and male partners, as long as he was the penetrator in his relations. So, obviously, lots of men were bisexual. That kind of goes without saying. And I know this section is rather short because not a lot of homosexuality is noted in ancient Rome, because a lot of it comes from Greek influence. So I'd kind of just be repeating the same facts over and over again. And I don't really want to bore you all with that more than I already am. And to finish off the gay men section, as I like to call it, with a little bit of quick fire. There were these two men, Theseus and Pirithous. I don't think that's how you say his name. And Pirithous always heard of the amazing tales of Theseus, who famously slayed a minotaur. But Pirithous wanted proof of Theseus' strength, so he stole Theseus' cattle and drove them out of town. Now, Theseus was rightfully upset, so he went to go challenge the guy who took his cattle to a duel. But they were both enamored with each other's beauty that they took up an oath of friendship. Theseus spent so much time with Pirithous that his wife, Phaedra, felt left out almost, and tried to convince her own son to become her lover, because Theseus also neglected his son to spend more time with Pirithous. Of course, people can make up whatever they want about this story. Nobody was really there when it happened at the end of the day. I choose to believe that this is real because a lot of crazy things were going on in ancient Rome. But, to each their own. Ending off this kind of boring section, we're getting more into the interesting. And I say interesting because we're talking about lesbian relationships in the ancient world, but more specifically in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. I say it's more interesting because not only because it's lesbian relationships in the ancient world, but because the lives of ancient Greek women aren't really well documented or recorded, let alone the relationships of people of the same gender. Even finding documents about male-on-male relationships proved to be difficult for a while. But, of course we found it. To begin with, I want to start off with something that I found really, really interesting. Somewhere within 630 and 612 BCE, on the island of Lesbos, there was born a child whose name was Sappho, who later went on to become a poet. In her poems, she often wrote wedding songs and poems of love to women, writing as much as 12,000 lines of poetry in her time alive. Now, you may have picked up on two familiar sounding names, those being Lesbos and Sappho, both sounding eerily similar to the words lesbian and sapphic respectively. Sources say that because of how famous Sappho's poems were, her island's name, Lesbos, became synonymous with the words lesbian, meaning a relationship between two women. Same with her name, Sappho, evolving into the word sapphic. It's also been recorded that Sappho was a lesbian, with many paintings of her staring lustfully at women, but in a lot of her poems, writers turned her poems into heterosexual poems towards men, which skewed how people perceived the poems. And people like Frederick Walker say that her feelings toward other women were, a direct quote says, idealistic and non-sensual, despite that not being the case. Looking at one poem in specific that I did a bit of research on, that being poem 96, she explicitly says that she longs for the lips and breasts of a woman named Atthis. In another poem titled Sappho 31, or at least poem 31, where she talks about how seeing an unnamed woman, albeit for a short time, renders her unable to speak. Her blood runs hot, and her heart starts to beat wildly. Say what you will, of course, about these poems, But these are clear signs, at least to me, that she is in love with said unnamed woman. Moving on again to ancient Rome, there are a few interesting things that it mentions about lesbians back then. Men in ancient Rome viewed lesbian sex as a target towards them, because they believed only men should be the one having pleasure from sex, but it also viewed They also viewed it as a challenge to their male-dominated view of things. Romans back then believed that sex could only happen with at least one person that has a dick, so they believed lesbian sex to use a dildo of sorts to have sexual relations. They describe lesbians as women who have a higher sex drive than men and will take the penetrative role with both men and women. Even in the 2nd century CE, a writer named Lucian wrote that there were women in the island of Lesbos who were masculine looking, but decided not to have sex with men and instead decided to lay with other women. There is also a story of a daughter named Iphis. Now, before she was born, her father said if her mother were to give birth to a girl, he would kill the child. So her mother gave the daughter a gender-ambiguous name, of course that being Iphis. Once she was 13, however, her father picked a girl named Ianthe to be her bride, all without knowing that Iphis was a girl. In the 8th century, a writer named Ovid wrote about them in his book, The Metamorphoses, and described their relationship as such. They were equal of age, they both were lovely, had learned the ABCs from the same teacher, and so love came to both of them and filled their hearts with longing. Ending take 2. Since I'm already done, at least at the end of this high-risk video, at least a high risk for me, I want to talk about the interesting stuff that caught my eye, but I didn't have enough information on to make a full video out of. For example, historians believe that women depicted with their arms around another woman's waist or leaning on one another on vases in wall art can be assumed to be lesbian. And there are also many instances where women are depicted in erotic scenes with other women bathing together and touching on one another, and they can be assumed to be lesbian too. People believed that in ancient Greece, there was a military unit called the Secret Band of Thebes, or Thebes, I don't know, and it was comprised of 150 pairs of male lovers, and it was the prime example of how ancient Greeks used love between the troops to boost fighting spirit and morale of the soldiers. However, many historians say that it doesn't exist due to its not being in Xenophon's Hellenica. The Hellenica was a document of the political and military history dating around the first half of the 4th century CE to be more specific. And there are multiple pots, coins, cups, paintings, and even wall art of love between two men dating from 550 BCE to 300 BCE. One of the really interesting ones is that in 1891, painter St. George Hare made the painting The Victory of Faith, depicting two ancient Roman women, or Greco-Roman women, both nude, laying next to each other, who are believed to be a mistress and a maid. That's about all I had. Sorry for the really long break. Again, I just haven't had many ideas and I've just been lazy. Even this one took a bit of work to get started, but I'm glad I got it started. Hope y'all enjoyed. Hopefully, the people I don't want to see this video, hopefully they don't see the video. But more importantly, I hope you guys have a good day, all 24 of my subscribers. And, I'll see you when I do, and I hope all of you have a good day, rest of your week, rest of your month, rest of your year. This is See You at 6. I'll be signing out until I see you again.